Hey, look at me. You are allowed to feel however you are feeling about this.
God, I could use a smoke.
You're speaking my language.
Today I'm going to be reviewing Paris-based studio Dontnod Entertainment's latest title, Tell Me Why. For those of you who don't know, Dontnod Entertainment is the very same studio behind the magnificent Life is Strange. Let's get right into it.
As usual, let's start by talking about performance and optimization issues. On both my desktop machine with a Ryzen 7 2700X and an RTX 2070 Super, and my laptop, which is an Acer Nitro 5 with just a 1650 Ti, both machines were able to run the game buttery smooth, as it's not demanding at all. It supposedly requires a 1050, but I'm sure you can get away with less, especially since this game is perfectly fine in 30 FPS. I actually thought the game was too little demanding. It would have been nice if they had added some better visuals, just considering that this game is, at least at the time, exclusive to just the PC, Xbox One, and Xbox Series X, even though the Xbox One is, of course, now slightly dated hardware. I actually preferred the control scheme of this game compared to Life is Strange slightly on PC. Not that that's the most important factor in a game like this. Either way, it was quite similar, especially to Life is Strange before the storm. So my 2070 Super was getting 144 FPS, which is my monitor's max at 1080p, and usually only at around 30, 40, no more ever than 70% usage. There were some occasional random stutters, but thankfully they were very rare. The game crashed once the entire time I played the first chapter, which was in many separate occasions, and it just showed an error message and a crash, and that was it. Didn't happen again. There's a sort of jumpiness that I find sometimes annoying when you're rotating the camera. It can happen in certain situations, but it wasn't terrible, and it wasn't happening most of the time. So here on the Steam page, it says that a 1050 is the minimum required, but I'm almost positive you could get away with less. Alright, let's talk about the story. I'm going to tell you without spoiling anything that the opening scene will already provoke great interest, and then it continues a bit slow from there. It does pick up eventually. It's not bad. It just takes a little bit to pick up. But the opening scene definitely brings up some very intriguing questions that made me want to continue right from the get-go. The story in this game is different from pretty much any other game in the sense that to really get hold of everything that's happening, you need to actually explore the world and interact with objects and people, which I found made it much more immersive, and I actually liked that aspect of the game a lot. While you're interacting with objects and people, there's a sort of foreshadowing that creates a sense of mystery throughout the early part of the chapter. So some of you are probably wondering if this game added any substitute for what Life is Strange had, where Max was able to turn back time. And yes, they did, but here it's something different. Instead, the two siblings, Tyler and Allison, as they're called, can talk to each other through their minds, and they can also conjure up past memories that both of them see visualized physically, so the player could see them as well. It was certainly an interesting idea. So a good part of the story overall is told just in bits and pieces. One notable thing about the game's story is how it chooses to tackle the themes of having a trans character involved. This is something that we have not been seeing in many games recently, aside from The Last of Us 2. I'm glad that Dontnod Entertainment was bold enough to take this theme into question. And I wish I could talk more about the story, but I really don't feel like I can without spoiling anything, since this is such a story-based game. Just to give you an idea of how the story felt, though, just an hour into the game, I definitely felt somewhat invested in the story, but I didn't feel like I couldn't stop playing either. Decisions seem to affect dialogue more than they do the main storyline, but this is not as bad as it might sound, because choosing certain decisions can definitely open up some interesting dialogue paths, and that gives you more of a feel for both of the main characters and allows you to play them in the way that you want, since both Allie and Tyler are playable. And during the chapter, you switch between playing the two of them. One thing I definitely notice is as you progress throughout the chapter, the story does get better. I also really like the setting of the story. It's set with these two siblings who live in Alaska, which is not a setting that is very often seen and that most people are familiar with. So to me, that added another layer of intrigue to the story. What the story sort of revolves around is these two protagonists, Tyler and Allie, discovering answers about a certain big past event, which I'm not going to refer to directly, since I don't want to spoil anything. But overall, I tended to get the feeling that the story itself was not quite as interesting as the world and the dialogue and the choices that I could make that would have an effect on it. The story felt more linear overall. I was glad though that the ending was actually a cliffhanger, so I am excited to play Chapter 2, which luckily is coming out September 2nd. Very short wait time this time around from Not Entertainment. As far as the graphics go, I'll tell you right now, the graphics are definitely a big step up from Life is Strange, and the motion capture is also very good. Even though the character models are great, some textures at times look way too jagged, and Not clearly spent a lot less time on objects than they did on the character models themselves. It's almost like they spent too little time on objects. When you see something like this, it makes you wonder, what is this, 2009? This looks like something that you would see in Heavy Rain, which is a great game, by the way, but it was on the PS3. I really would have liked to see Dontnod leverage the power of the PC and the Xbox platforms a little bit more, although I do understand that really nice graphics are not exactly Dontnod Entertainment's strong suit. It's just not something that they've really focused on that much in the past. But still, they could have worked a bit harder on textures like these, like this photograph here. There are also some times when the voice doesn't line up with the mouth movements, which can be really distracting, but luckily it's not most of the time, so it's not terrible. As far as the gameplay goes, there is some repeated dialogue sometimes when you interact with objects as the playable character, but that still doesn't take away from the fact that there's so many objects to interact with that each have their own details to add to the entire storyline in a very neat way. The game goes as far as to include collectibles, which I found to be rather unnecessary. I just didn't feel that they really fit into the world. There's already enough to explore as far as story details go. That being said, collectibles of course didn't take anything away from the story either. I was having a great time just wandering the world and looking at things and hearing the interesting dialogue between the two characters about all the objects I find. If you choose to rush through the story without looking around, you will certainly miss out on a lot. The game also implements puzzles, which while being an interesting addition, I found to be poorly executed to the point where it's hard to know where to begin, and it's more frustrating than fun sometimes.
Ouch!
Are you okay? What happened?
I just hit my head like an idiot. Wait, what? Where are you?
Ty, I'm outside. But I can hear you in my head.
The ability of Allie and Tyler to talk telepathically was even more interesting to use to me than the one of bringing back memories. I really wish this ability had played a bigger role, since it creates more options for the dialogue paths and for where the story goes. That being said, there are already so many meaningful objects around the world to add texture to the story, and I really couldn't help but to stop and explore a bit all the time throughout my playthrough. The game even sometimes requires you to remember details, which means that you need to pay attention to the world, and you don't want to miss those details, because if you do, then you may be unable to progress in the way that you wanted in the story. At first, I was not the biggest fan of switching between playing as Allie and her brother Tyler, but eventually it grew on me, since I really like to have the ability to experience the story from both characters' perspective, and I found that ability to be most important when they are in conflict. So is it worth $30? Honestly, at $30 for only 3 chapters, it is a bit expensive. It's more expensive than Life is Strange, in fact. Also, the chapters in Life is Strange seem to be a little bit longer or the same to me. Of course, the actual length of your playthrough is going to vary based on how you play the game. Since it's such a similar type of game to Life is Strange, I would say that this game is certainly worth purchasing if you really loved Life is Strange. I know there's a lot of you. If you weren't such a huge fan though, I'd think about waiting for a sale or possibly skipping it altogether. If you didn't like Life is Strange, chances are you won't like this at all. You also may want to wait to hear reviews of chapters 2 and 3 before buying, since the story and the gameplay and everything could just go either way. I especially think you may want to wait since chapter 2 comes out already on September 2nd. If you are waiting though, just make sure not to look up anything about the game until then so you don't accidentally run into a spoiler, which would ruin the experience of such a story-based game. So how does this title compare to Life is Strange? This game was better than Life is Strange in exactly one aspect: its graphics. The gameplay was close behind Life is Strange at best, and the story definitely does not rival that of Life is Strange up to this point. But it's hard to say as far as the whole 3 chapters go without knowing where the story will continue in the next 2 chapters. Though I highly doubt it will surpass Life is Strange mastery in the story department. While the ability to pull back past memories did work well in Tell Me Why, it was definitely not better than the ingenious ability of Max to reverse time in Life is Strange. As far as exclusivity goes, when I heard that this game was exclusive to Xbox and PC, I was expecting better visuals overall. Life is Strange is far behind, of course, but we must consider that that game came out in 2015 and that it eventually got ported to mobile devices, which makes me think that Dontnod should have done more graphically, since this game is unlikely to ever be ported to mobile, since it's a Microsoft exclusive. It does not have a port to mobile as a reason to try to be as little demanding as possible. A mobile port would have been likely had the Windows Phone not been discontinued. It would have been nice to be able to play mobily somehow, but that's not going to be an option. So I thought they might as well at least have included top-tier visuals, which they clearly did not do. It's entirely rather unfortunate that this game became an exclusive, since with a small downgrade, or even maybe without one, it could definitely run on mobile devices. That being said, even though this is a Windows exclusive, I did like that this title gave a lot more flexibility, since technically anyone with a recent PC or even a Mac, if you're not opposed to using Boot Camp, with some sort of dedicated graphics card included, can run this game probably somewhat well, at least 30 FPS. While if it was a PlayStation exclusive, probably only people with a PS5 would be able to run this. So I'm glad that Dontnod made a deal with Microsoft rather than Sony, since this will allow many more people to play the game than if it was a PS5 exclusive, of course. Even though it's a Microsoft exclusive, this game is available on PC, Mac through Boot Camp, though not officially, and Xbox One and Xbox Series X. That's technically 4 platforms, as opposed to just one, had Sony made a deal with Dontnod.
Now that you guys have heard my take on Tell Me Why, I want to hear yours. If you plan on picking up the game, leave me a comment down below to tell me. And if you don't plan on picking up the game, you can also tell me why down in the comments. Please excuse the pun. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.